Welcome back to Akamai TV. I'm Nelson Rodriguez. When you sit down to watch the latest episode of a Dragon epic that you might be enjoying or some sporting match, you're probably not thinking a lot about the size of the chunks or how the video is encoded. And our next guest, Will Law, I suspect, thinks about some of these things sometimes when he's sitting down to watch TV. Will, does it ruin your experience, the fact that you know what's going on behind the scenes when you watch TV?
Yeah, not at all. So when I watch OTT, I'm relatively sympathetic to problems. I see when they're happening and I realize what it takes to get rid of them. So I'm frustrated by them like anybody else. Sometimes I run, on the web page, I'll actually look at the debug panel and see if I can figure out what just happened. When I'm watching TV, it's a different problem, because there I'm exposed to ad content, which I'm not exposed to on the SVOD services. And I find that frustrating because most of the time it's irrelevant to me, the advertising. And I think, why am I sitting here watching something that I don't actually want to watch?
Yeah, what's odd is that even exists on web-based video. Like if you're watching, if you're visiting a publisher and you're watching video content, it's not uncommon for me to see ads that have
In fact,
nothing
it's often
to do with
worse because the inventory of ads that are sold on the web are often tiny, and you'll get the same ad shown to you 3 or 4 times, which is a really detrimental effect for the advertiser. I have anger rising because of their ad, let alone I could have just ignored them once. So I think targeting for ads is important. Show me ads, if you're going to show me ads, and I'm going to see ads, I'd rather see ads that were relevant to me than ads that were absolutely irrelevant. And the majority of them are irrelevant.
Yeah, one of the risks is the little bit of information they get about you. Like you live in the Bay Area, or that you once went shopping for a Volkswagen, suddenly becomes to them your entire identity. And that's worse in some ways than random ads.
Yeah, advertising is there's this antagonism between personal information, which I want to protect, and then the advertisers want access to that so they can personalize it. So they'll be the first to say, well, Will, we can't personalize it for you because you won't tell us anything about yourself.
Right.
And that's true. So therefore I get ads that are meant for women and that are not so relevant for me. And it's a relatively, gender is one of the first things they'll try to figure out. So there's when you go down into the ad industry, there's a tremendous amount of data trading and cataloging and graphs and maps being generated about people. And I think most people calmly sitting in front of an OTT feed or a broadcast stream have no idea of the amount of data that's been collected or the amount of targeting that's attempted to be done on them today.
Yeah, I mean, that's a level of complexity, right? Additional level of complexity that I think is being added to what is already seemingly a fairly complex problem set that OTT providers and broadcasters are having to deal with. So how do you see that landscape when we think about all of the choices that broadcasters and OTT providers have to make in terms of preparing video to be consumed all over the world? How do you see companies managing that complexity?
So the complexity is increasing dramatically. Streaming used to be this relatively simple, pick a codec, pick a bit rate, there might be one, send it to the device, it had your player on it and it might play it. And today we're attempting to decouple content preparation from content playback. So you want to be able to prepare content not knowing the device it's going to play on. And you don't want to have to write a specific player for your content for every possible device so that it will play reliably. But in decoupling content production from distribution and from playback, we run into tremendous permutations of technology, and that's where the problems arise. And a lot of successful providers today do it by building walled gardens, and like Netflix or Hulu. They own the content, they prep the content, they package it, they manage the distribution, and they write all their own players. And that's a very expensive undertaking. And unless you're one of those very large companies and sophisticated companies, if you're a mid-tier distributor of video, you don't have the resources to do that. And your solution is simply to go for the majority use case and restrict the devices you can play it to or to output it on with a certain format or a certain codec, and essentially avoid the problem.
Which is like the old days when you go on the web and visit a website and they'd say, sorry, Will, you're on the wrong browser.
Yeah, you must use Internet 4 to load this web page.
Yeah, right, yeah.
We get this very similar thing today.
Yeah, now I've talked to several integrators and to encoding companies about this, and I don't think I've ever asked you this question. why don't we just settle on a single format, a single standard for everyone all the time?
For the same reason we don't wear the same codes or drive the same car. It is
'Cause we're not
personal
always
preference,
cool.
personal choice, and a sports car is meant to go fast. A moving van is meant to move heavy things slowly. Both have utility. So different formats arise for different purposes. You want super low latency, you're going to use WebRTC. You want low latency, you might use chunk-based CMAF. You don't care about latency and want absolute stability, use 10-second TS segments. They're all valid in their application space. So there's a diversity of formats because there's a diversity in applications that need to be solved. And better, newer formats replace older ones. It's clearly evident in codecs. MPEG-2 is better than MPEG-1 by 50% compression ratio. AVC over MPEG-2, another 50%. HEVC over AVC, another 50%. So there's an evolution in codecs that's definitely to everybody's interests. Unless you're building MPEG-1 decoders, in which case.
Right, then you've got a very
It hurts,
specific,
yeah.
But what's interesting though is if you look at a lot of other segments of technology, whether that's development of websites or the production of graphics, there's more abstraction happening, right? So the designer doesn't have to be, like in the old days, if you were a layout designer, you had to also know how to code at some level.
Yeah.
And that becomes more and more abstracted. You don't need to know how to do that to write a document in Word. But with video, if you're an OTT service, why should you have to even be thinking about that? Why shouldn't you just be able to rely on a single solution that someone else is deciding for you?
Because it's becoming very complex and you need to specialize. In the old days, I used to write players for some big companies. I was a one-man player development shop, and that was fine 10 years ago.
Yeah.
You showed up, you did the UI of the player, you did the ABR logic, you did everything. Today you have people who specialize in ABR logic, people who specialize in scrub bar UIs, because it's got sophisticated enough that specialization must occur. And the same for encoding and packaging. I counsel most customers today, unless you're hiring PhDs in encoding, don't try to write your own encoding solution. It's got too sophisticated. You need machine learning, you need context aware, you're developing different profiles, you've got dynamic bitrate ladders. It's beyond the majority of most companies to do that efficiently. Better to outsource that to experts and focus on what your company is doing in a strategically differentiable way. In other words, you have unique content or delivering in a unique manner, or you've created an interactive service. But don't try to be a specialist yourself. It's getting too complex.
Yeah. What 3 recommendations would you have for a media company that needs to plan out its next 3 years in terms of technology?
That's, there's a lot I can say, but probably at the top of the list would be make a move now over to CMAF as a container. CMAF's not a format. CMAF is a box in which you put audio, video, but it's a common box that the industry is now agreeing can be referenced by both HLS and Dash. And you're going to see this year, 2019, a lot of big content producers, this is the year they shift over to using HLS with CMAF, for example. So that's definitely future-proof. It gets you common encryption, and it gets you a robust workflow. It also gets you less cache contention for different containers at the edge. So CMAF's a safe bet.
CMAF, yeah.
Secondly is shift to common encryption for your DRM. More and more content is going to require DRM for distribution. It's going to become a baseline. And common encryption is by far the most efficient way to package multiple DRMs into the same container, which happens to be that CMAF container. So if you don't do CMAF for some reason, still try to do common encryption inside an ISO container. And probably the third would be, we're moving away from a monocodec world that we've had for the last decade, which is H.264 everywhere. Into a multi-codec world. You've got VVC coming out, you've got HEVC, you've got EVC, and you've got AV1. And that's just between now and next year. And there will be more codec iterations after that. We will never, ever go back to one codec everywhere. And you need to embrace that. Codecs are the translation between delivery, your quality, and your cost. So use them to your advantage. Build a system that takes advantage of new codecs as they arrive, and don't go back to the rigidity of the last decade.
How do you do that? I mean, how do you make sure that you are flexible enough to...
So you've got to build, first of all, a dynamic encoding platform that doesn't encode your 10,000 assets once, does them all the same, and you don't touch them for 9 months till you have a codec review meeting.
Right.
Every 24 hours, you want to take player data. What clients are actually hitting your system? What codecs are they capable of supporting? And how many views does each one get? And then do the maths. Decide if I take not my entire catalog, but my most popular content and encode it tonight to these other codec variations, how much money will I save tomorrow in delivery? And as long as you save more than it costs you to encode it, then go ahead and make that change. And constantly churn your origin archive to maximize QoE for the end user, minimize your storage and distribution cost.
So it has to be an active decision. You don't just put it up on a shelf
right.
and
It's
forget
dynamic.
about it. Yeah, that makes sense.
It's shifting from static to dynamic.
Yeah, Will, it is always a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you for
I
spending
could chat
time.
for hours, so thank you very much, and thanks for this afternoon.
Thank you, and Akamai TV will be back. Thanks a lot, Will.
Thank you.